I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protected different, the stranger than. I'm an autism awareness angel. It's good, cause I'm cool with the unique behavior. I'm an autism awareness angel. Will you accept me? Cause I accept you. I'm an autism awareness angel, cause a view from the spectrum is a better point of view. The question at hand is...
Hi, my name is Tally, and today on Autism 30, we are speaking with Mr. James Burton, registered speech-language pathologist from Exceptional Speech and Language Services located in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. James received his Master of Science degree in Speech and Language Pathology at the University of British Columbia and his BA in Psychology at Simon Fraser University. He has been working in the field for the past 8 years and is a registered speech and language pathologist and a member of the College of Speech and Hearing Health Professionals of British Columbia, the BC Association of Speech and Language Pathologists and Audiologists, and the Canadian Association of Speech and Language Pathologists and Audiologists. Welcome, James.
Hello.
And what is speech pathology?
Well, technically it's speech and language pathology, and language is actually the larger part of what I do.
Okay.
When you're talking about language development, people think of it as something that just happens automatically, but there's a lot of stages to it. So you go from babies babbling to the one-word stage, the two-word stage, sentences, to bigger things like conversation skills and storytelling abilities. So that development is not as automatic as people think. So that's a bigger part of what speech pathologists look at. I think we get called speech pathologists because it's faster.
Yes, and you're right. Not many people do know that theory.
And the other thing is that language also includes a lot of nonverbal cues, tone of voice, body language, facial expression, up to things that we take for granted, like taking turns when we speak, or the fact that we don't really take turns, but we kind of do. It's a bit complicated.
And it must be complicated for our kids.
Yeah, it is especially complicated for kids on the autism spectrum.
There's no question. Now, how did your company, Exceptional Speech and Language Services, come to be, and where is it now?
Well, I was lucky enough to be mentored by one of my professors out of university, so I quickly went into the private side of things, and then later on I went out on my own, and I was also lucky that I started working at a school. They became my primary client. It's Kenneth Gordon Maplewood School in North Vancouver.
Yes, that's a great private school for special needs kids.
Yeah, it's all kids with different learning needs. So we have kids with autism, kids with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We've got dyslexia, all sorts of different things. So everyone who's there has something that they need special.
And how do things work in the clinic compared to at the school?
Well, at the clinic, because it's a smaller office, it's generally one-on-one or very small groups. And at the school, I have a wide variety of things I can do. I'm seeing kids individually. I'm seeing them in very small groups. I'm going into the classroom. And a big important part about it is what I can do to work with the adults that work with the kids.
That's extremely important. And I know I've made this comment on several of my prior podcasts that I believe in BC, having it being an inclusive education, that the teachers really do need more education than what they're currently getting to accommodate our kids.
Well, they need the support, that's for sure. There's
Absolutely.
Some great teachers in there, and what I love about Kenneth Gordon is how open and accepting of my ideas. They let me try new things, and they try them with me, and we find out what works and what doesn't work, and work together as a team.
And that's probably why they have the great reputation that they do.
I would say that's a big part of it.
And what is the philosophy of Exceptional Speech and Language Services?
Well, it's hard to talk about my entire philosophy, but since this is about autism, I'll tell you my philosophy towards autism.
That would be wonderful.
I kind of think of myself as someone who's there to, translate between people on the spectrum and people who are neurotypical or non-autistic.
Yes.
And being neurotypical myself, I definitely have a lot of learning to do still, and always will, about the people with autism that I work with. That's why I really value working with some of the adults who I work with, because they can tell me things more directly than the kids can.
Absolutely. And I know I've made this comment before that I know I would love to spend 10 minutes in my child's head. So the fact that you can communicate between someone with autism to the neurotypical and facilitate that dialogue, I think that's brilliant.
I think that's just as important as trying to help the kids with autism or the adults learn how to function in neurotypical society, because they're definitely the ones that are in the minority. I think they need a lot more understanding, but at the same time, you still have to help them understand neurotypicals.
I couldn't agree more. And what services and programs do you offer people with autism at your company?
Well, I should point out that my company is much more focused on working with children and adults on the autism spectrum who are is classified as high functioning, which
Yes.
is a bit of a misleading term, because
Can you please explain to our audience what high functioning autism is in comparison to the latter?
okay, well, high functioning autism would have been called Asperger's, still is in many circles. It's kids and adults who are verbal.
Yes.
They look typical from the outside. They might have a few idiosyncratic movements or something, but generally look pretty typical. But I think it's because of that looking typical that it makes it actually even harder for them in some ways, because so much more is expected. Whereas someone who's low functioning, on the other hand, may not be verbal, may be more obviously impaired, well, at least in our society, impaired. And, people give them a break.
Yes. And I think in society they call autism the invisible disability, because people assume that there's no issue until they actually look deeper. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so. Even the word disability, I think it's a disability because of the society we live in.
I agree. And I don't like the word disability myself currently. I don't know what other word to use.
I know, right?
But I agree. And there's an area of autism where many of our kids need help with is social communication. And you hear that word, but could you please explain to our audience what that is?
Well, social communication is a lot of it's about the body language and the facial expression, the tone of voice that I was talking about before. It's also about things that people take for granted that we learn socially over time, that we take turns, that we talk about other people's interests. We don't just talk about our own interests. We show interest in other people.
Yes.
And learning how to show interest, you look at the person, you orient your body towards the person, you make little comments to show that you're listening. All of these things are learned skills, but they're learned very easily by neurotypical people, and they are very difficult to learn for many of our children and adults on the spectrum.
And it's amazing because these are things that a typical person like myself wouldn't necessarily think about at all when you're learning how to communicate. So when you're dealing with your child, it's to get around that thought that every single little step really needs to be taught.
It does need to be taught, and we can make assumptions, false assumptions, that a child understands this because we have grown up to understand this so intrinsically, and those assumptions make us think that sometimes that especially high functioning children with autism are being rude or being defiant or just reacting in a way that doesn't make any sense at all. And you have to be able to sit back and think, okay, what is causing this? It can't just be because they're trying to be rude. It's got to be something else.
Absolutely, and it goes to intent, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it does come down to intent.
I understand that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and they're all different. However, typically, what do you help our community members with?
Typically, it's social skills, as we were talking about earlier. It's also self-regulation, so ways to know when you're starting to get upset before it gets out of control, and maybe bring yourself back into control before it causes a problem. So that would be self-regulation. Within the social skills side of things, we're looking at conversation skills. We're looking at how to show that you're interested in other people, explaining why that's important, explaining why to the person with autism that it's actually beneficial to be around other people. Because sometimes I
Yes.
feel like they want to, but they're not really sure of the benefit until it's too late and they've missed some of those skills.
Yes, and I know some of our past guest community members who have spoken, they've spoken often about they're in a group of people and people misinterpret the signals that they're giving them, saying they're aloof or they don't want to be part of the group, but that's the exact opposite of what they actually feel. They do want to be part of the group and they do want to be included. And
But they need to be taught how to show it.
absolutely. And I think that's wonderful that you're doing that for our community. Now, do you offer services on a one-to-one basis or do you also offer group sessions?
I do offer both. One-on-one is much easier to organize. And because I spend so much time at the school, when I do group sessions, it tends to be there. One of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast and get the word out is not so that I can have more business than I can actually even handle, but to let people know that I'm here and to find groups that fit well together. Because the trouble is when you've got a whole bunch of different people with autism, sometimes their differences make a group not work. You know, one's 16 and one's 12. They don't have much in common except for the fact that they're both on the spectrum. And then how deeply on the spectrum are they?
Yes.
Right? So they're very, very different. And it's hard to get the group dynamic that works.
Yes, and I've heard that many times with people that work in group sessions. It can be difficult, and I appreciate that you actually would spend the time and not just lump various peoples together, that you're really cognizant of the people that you work with and try to work out a group that really works for the individuals in that particular group, which I think is great.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that by getting the word out more, maybe I'll be able to find more people that fit. And also, if other specialists that are out there, you know, I don't need to take them all. I'll trade you a few of mine for a few of yours, and we'll both get a good group.
Absolutely. And what is the difference between working one-on-one and in a group, and what is the benefit to both? What's the benefit to working one-on-one and the benefits to a group session, let's say?
Well, I think the working one-on-one part is essential at the beginning to learn some of the basic language that goes along with social thinking, which is the Michelle Garcia winner style of doing things, which I think a lot of people who have relatives with autism will know who she is. You have to learn that language.
Yes.
And you have to be able to understand what we're talking about when we talk about things like thinking with your eyes or following the group plan. It all sounds a bit strange until you've learned it and you've looked at the visuals and okay, I know what that is, I know what this is. Great. So, but learning all that does not make you good at it in terms of like doing the activities. So you
Yes.
really need a chance to practice or it won't generalize. By generalize, I mean, you know, it's good to know. We all know what we should be doing. You know, we all need to eat less fatty food and we all need to exercise more, but
Yes,
we
true.
don't all do it. So, you know, just because a child or an adult on the spectrum can tell you what they're supposed to do in a social situation does not mean they're going to be able to do it.
Yes, very true. And why do you feel your services are important to our clientele?
Social skills are so important to everybody. It's how the neurotypical world works. If you don't have them, you can be a brilliant scientist or you can be brilliant in your field and you won't be able to get a job. And it's such a shame. You won't be able to get a job because you won't get past the interview process, or you'll get into the office and you might do something offensive by accident. And we're just losing all these brilliant people that could be helping society, and they're just missing out for this one skill that everyone else is taking for granted. So I really want to be able to help those people fit in, not to change them into neurotypical people because I don't want to change who they are, but to help them get past some of those hurdles that are there because of the society we live in.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned employment as well, because I know in our community it's quite difficult, or it's staggering, the unemployment rate for people in our community. And I think what you're saying, it is important. Unfortunately, you do need to know certain social rules to be able to get meaningful employment, unfortunately. And I think it's great that you're actually teaching those skills.
Well, recently I've started working with more adults on the autism spectrum.
Yes.
Only a small amount compared to the amount of children and youth.
Yes.
Funding's a big part of that. There's no funding after 18, which is a whole other story that we could
I
talk
agree,
about.
and yes, we could talk about
But I'd like to do more of that, because as we were talking about earlier, you learn so much from an adult who can articulate their problems in an adult world, because the child's problems when they're on the spectrum in a neurotypical community is very different than an adult's problems in the same area.
Absolutely. And what success stories do you have to tell our audience?
In terms of success, I want to make sure we don't think, again, that we're trying to turn somebody into a neurotypical person, right?
No.
So when I think of success, I think of success as how did I make a small improvement in my life? Did I learn how to have a better conversation and get a little bit more out of my interactions with people? Those little things are the success story. We're not looking for the big pill that cures things. Not that I would want to, but just I don't talk about like massive success stories. I talk about day-to-day little things.
And I concur. I know myself as a teacher, I valued the exact same thing. It's the little things that add up and that are most meaningful to us. And what are the maximum and minimum ages of people that you work with?
The minimum age I work with is 6, because I'm not on the registered autism service providers list.
Yes.
It just never turned out that I worked with the young children on the spectrum, and so I'm a bit limited in that way. As soon as the children turn 6, then you can use your funding with me, but until then, no. I think there's some problems with that whole side of things, but yet again, that's another long story.
Are we talking about funding? Because I agree, but yes, that is a whole other topic. And can you use our autism funding, as we're talking about funding, that's given to us from the British Columbia government to access your services?
Absolutely, as long as the child is over 6.
Absolutely, and I believe...
Or 6 and over, I should say.
Yeah, I believe right now, currently in British Columbia, it's $6,000, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's $6,000 a year, but that has to go between not just a registered speech language pathologist, but also maybe an occupational therapist, a psychologist, behavior
Absolutely.
interventionist, all sorts of that. It has to go a long way.
And do you need a referral, or can people access you directly?
Definitely can be accessed directly. The only thing to be sure of is if once you've decided on the therapist that you're going with, that you have to fill out all your paperwork.
Yes, so there's a bunch of forms to fill out before you work, and that's completely understandable.
Yeah.
I think that's the same in every location that you go to, at least every one that I've been to.
One thing to remember, if you're shopping around and you're trying to find the right fit for your son or daughter, or for your child in general, is that you can use your extended medical and go, and if you have it, and often there's a category for speech language pathologists or occupational therapists or psychology, so you can use that for those initial appointments and say, okay, I like this person, but I don't think that's going to be a good fit. At least it's not coming directly out of your pocket.
That's really good to know, because I know some people probably won't be aware of that. So thank you for that information. And do you work with clients at their location, or do you only offer services at your office?
I'm afraid I only offer services at my 2 offices, just because I found that I'm already so busy that driving around between people just takes up too much of my time.
And that's completely understandable. And your details for your offices will be on our webpage at autism30.com, which you can find after this podcast. Now, if a parent makes a request for you to assist them with their child's IEP and individual education plans, for those of you that don't know, can you assist them with that?
I can assist them with that. I haven't done a lot of that, but I'm certainly able to do so. I know how to write an IEP and write goals from an SLP perspective. Again, I think I would be doing more of the liaising with the school-based SLP to do the actual IEP writing. Because I would be a home team speech language pathologist, and that would be the school team speech language pathologist.
That's really good to know, because I know a lot of parents want to bring in their own team to assist with, certainly at a public school meeting. And that's really good to know that you actually do that. Do you do assessments, and can you make recommendations for teachers and other faculty at the school then?
I do assessments. Mostly they're speech and language development assessments. If you want to have an autism assessment, that is not something I can do on my own. In fact, you need a team. I believe you need a psychologist, a speech language pathologist, a doctor, and possibly a nurse. I'm sorry, I'm not 100% sure on that. But you do need a team. Sunny Hill does those.
Yes, they certainly do.
And I have a lot of respect for them because they have, a short time frame in which to do it, and sometimes it's a really hard call.
Absolutely, it certainly can be. And would you like to clarify any misconceptions about your craft that you believe some people may have?
I think the only misconception that I'd like to clear up is, again, back to that whole speech versus language.
Yes.
It is much more about language. There's much more to speech language pathology than there is to just speech. I think people think about, the King's Speech and stuttering, which is also a specialty of mine. But it's not just about the speech. It's about that language development. And a lot of social communication is a big part of what we do.
Absolutely. And what do you love about your job?
What I love is the people aspect and being able to help, not totally altruistic in that. I just like being around people. I like figuring people out and in a helpful way. I feel like a lot of the kids that I work with are, they're little puzzles, and you're just trying to see what you can do to make their lives better. Whether that's a social communication or helping them manage their stutter or helping them to communicate and get what they want out of life, because, if you can't communicate, it's a lot tougher to get by.
Absolutely, and it's wonderful, and I can tell how passionate you are about your work, which is a wonderful thing as a parent myself. I think it's great to have people like you in the industry who really want to work with our kids, and you do it in such a gracious way. And what would you like the world to know about autism?
Well, I think we sort of touched on this earlier. I think it's really important not to make assumptions about people with autism. When we make assumptions that they can't do something, we don't give them a chance to shine. And when we make assumptions that they can do something that we expect them to do, then we end up putting them in this category of being rude or selfish or self-involved that isn't entirely fair, because we're not thinking about all of those social skills that we learn so easily that they're not learning easily. So it's to be careful with the assumptions.
I couldn't agree more. Now, I want to thank you for joining us today, James. You've been an absolute delight, and I think you've given our audience a lot of really great information out there.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Tally.
You're welcome. And if you would like to contact James and his company, Exceptional Speech and Language Services, you can find all of their details on our webpage at autism30.com. And once again, this is Tally telling you to live in love.
Hey, yo, I'm an autism awareness angel.